Hi everyone, I'm Rob Shapiro from Fitchburg State University, and today we're going to be talking about the BACB's 5th edition task list, item G3, establish and use conditioned reinforcers. So first off, why don't we talk about what a conditioned reinforcer is. Sometimes a conditioned reinforcer is called a secondary or learned reinforcer, and it's a stimulus that functions as a reinforcer due to prior pairing with one or more conditioned or unconditioned reinforcers. So with conditioned reinforcers, the reinforcer acquires its reinforcing properties through these repeated pairings. Essentially, we have learning taking place here. So for example, hearing someone say good job may become reinforcing because in the past, hearing good job has been paired with other reinforcing things like smiles, privileges, or tangibles. As another example, money may become reinforcing because in the past, money has been paired with access to lots of different reinforcing things. Important to keep in mind when we're talking about conditioned reinforcers, secondary or learned reinforcers, neither of those things, hearing someone say good job or having access to money, in and of themselves, they're not naturally reinforcing. An organism isn't born with hearing good job or receiving money having any kind of reinforcing value. There has to be learning that takes place there, and that learning has to do with that pairing with other things that are reinforcing. Now, it's important to remember with conditioned reinforcers, they don't have to be paired with an unconditioned reinforcer, things like food or drink or warmth, things that are just naturally reinforcing for all members of the species. Okay, they don't have to be paired with those unconditioned reinforcers. They can be, but they don't have to be. They can also be paired with other conditioned reinforcers, such as praise, tokens, money, smiles, all of those things, okay? And most of the time, that is actually what happens. Most of the time, our conditioned reinforcers gain their reinforcing properties because they've been paired with other conditioned reinforcers. Okay. It's also important to note that when we talk about using conditioned reinforcers, the majority of the reinforcers that we use are conditioned reinforcers, and there's a reason for that. There's a lot of value associated with them, and there's a lot of ease of use associated with them that in many cases make them more appropriate to use than primary reinforcers. There's also a specific kind of conditioned reinforcer that's worth talking about, and we talked about money on the last slide, and we'll get into that a little bit more here. That it is a conditioned reinforcer, but it's a special kind of conditioned reinforcer called a generalized conditioned reinforcers. And generalized conditioned reinforcers are conditioned reinforcers that, as a result of being paired with many other reinforcers, are not as susceptible to the effects of motivating operations for their effectiveness. So as an example of this, money has been paired with access to many different things, so it's not as susceptible to motivating operations. Likewise, for many people, being smiled at has been paired with many different reinforcers, so it's not as susceptible to motivating operations. So these are likely to function as generalized conditioned reinforcers. And if we think about this logically for a minute, so we take money. Okay, it's been paired with access to all kinds of different things, right? So as long as there is some kind of motivating operation in effect for something, right? As long as there is something that is valuable to an individual as a reinforcer, money is likely to continue to be reinforcing. Okay, but let's say, for example, that we have our paycheck that we get, and the only thing that our money can be traded in for is potato chips. Okay, how long are we going to continue to work? How long are we going to continue to find money valuable if the only thing it can be traded in for is potato chips? Sure, there's going to be time where we have a motivation potentially for potato chips, right? We're hungry. We want something salty. We want something crunchy, right? Maybe we then will be motivated by money because we can trade it in for those potato chips. But if that's all we can trade it in for, it's going to be very susceptible to the motivating operation surrounding hunger. Right? And so that's not going to be a generalized conditioned reinforcer. But because it's not, because we can do lots of stuff with our money, because it's paired with lots of different things, it's not going to be susceptible to deprivation and satiation related to food intake. Okay, same things with smiles, and this one's important because there's a distinction here in that it's not like smiles get traded in for different things. They've just been paired with many different things, right? When someone is smiling at you, there might be fun activities that you're engaging in. There might be praise that goes along with the smile. There might be the delivery of food if it's a family member is smiling at you as food is being put on the table for a family meal or at a restaurant, right? There's likely lots of different reinforcers that get paired with being smiled at. So being smiled at is likely a generalized conditioned reinforcer, and it's likely not going to be as susceptible to motivating operations for its effectiveness. And again, we talked about this, but it's really important to remember. Sometimes we make the mistake that we think about generalized conditioned reinforcers being about the trading in. Oh, if I'm trading in tokens for something, it's a generalized conditioned reinforcer. Not necessarily. It's really important to remember that generalized conditioned reinforcers develop based on the pairing of that reinforcer with lots of different reinforcers, not the trading in. The trading in may be a component of it, but it's not. It's neither necessary nor sufficient in terms of establishing a generalized conditioned reinforcer. Being able to exchange an item for a variety of other items may result in the development of a generalized conditioned reinforcer, but that's due to the pairing, not due to the trading in. So for example, let's take tokens, because these are one of the things that we typically conceptualize as a generalized conditioned reinforcer, but it's not always the case. Someone may have to earn 10 tokens and then be able to trade those 10 tokens in for a cookie. If the only thing the tokens can be traded in for is a cookie, the tokens will not become generalized conditioned reinforcers because they will still be susceptible to satiation. Because if the value of a cookie due to satiation is temporarily decreased, the value of the token decreases too. So here we see it's not a situation of trading in. The tokens are being traded in for a cookie, but because they're only being traded in for a cookie, the pairing is only tokens with cookies. So they're very susceptible to motivating operations. However, if those tokens can be traded in for cookies or for iPad time or for a walk or for extra recess, now we've got a generalized conditioned reinforcer, okay? And those tokens will be less susceptible to the effects of motivating operations, right? Because now there's lots of different things that those tokens have been paired with, so they're not going to be as susceptible. Okay, yeah, that's fine that I'm not hungry, but tokens are still valuable to me because maybe I want time on my iPad or maybe I want that extra recess. Okay, so it's about the pairing, not the trading in, and it's about being paired with multiple different reinforcers, not just with one reinforcer. And when we think about using conditioned reinforcers, you would use them in the same way that we would use an unconditioned reinforcer to increase desired behavior. However, they do have advantages that unconditioned reinforcers may not have. And this goes a long way towards explaining why the bulk of reinforcers that we use tend to be conditioned reinforcers. First of all, conditioned reinforcers, especially generalized conditioned reinforcers, are less susceptible to satiation, right? Going back to our example we were talking about with chips or cookies, both of which are unconditioned reinforcers, right? Because an organism doesn't need to learn that food is reinforcing. But if we deliver a whole bunch of cookies or a whole bunch of chips, it's likely that the learner is going to stop responding because those things are going to lose their value, at least temporarily. But if we're delivering a generalized conditioned reinforcer like a token that has been paired with lots of different things, we're less likely to get that satiation. Conditioned reinforcers can be easier to deliver. Again, things like a smile and saying nice job are conditioned reinforcers. Very easy to deliver and very, very natural. A third reason is that conditioned reinforcers may not carry the same stigma that some unconditioned reinforcers may carry. Certainly, traditionally, one of the big arguments put forth against ABA, and obviously it's an unfounded argument, but lots of people say, oh, you're just giving food, you're like a human Pez dispenser, you're just you're giving out cookies, you're giving out chips, you're giving out M&Ms, that's not okay, that's not normal, that's unhealthy, that's going to result in weight gain, all of those kinds of things, right? There's a reason that some of that stigma does exist. There are issues with using some unconditioned reinforcers, especially using them in large quantities. And conditioned reinforcers may not carry that same stigma. Next, conditioned reinforcers may be able to be withheld to increase motivation in a way that is ethical, whereas unconditioned reinforcers may not. Okay, we may be able to get away with withholding praise or withholding tokens or even withholding a smile, right? In a way that makes those things become more valuable to the learner so that when they're delivered, they mean something. We may be able to get away with withholding iPad time, right? To make it more valuable. And that's actually a strategy that we're likely to use. You could see a situation where we said to a family that we were working with, hey, can we please make sure that our learner isn't on the iPad for the hour before we show up for session, because it's going to make that iPad more valuable and we can use it as a reinforcer. Could you imagine saying to a family, hey, could you do me a favor and not let your kid eat all day before session so we make sure that food's really valuable? Obviously, there are ethical concerns with doing that. So we can withhold conditioned reinforcers to increase motivation in a way that ethically we probably can't do with unconditioned reinforcers. And then finally, conditioned reinforcers are more likely to mimic reinforcers that will be present in the natural environment, which is going to promote generalization. Again, it's a very artificial situation where we're delivering M&Ms or chips when a certain behavior occurs, whereas delivering things like, "Hey, nice job," or a smile, praise, social contact, all of those things are much more likely to be consistent with what would happen in the natural environment when our learner engaged in desired behavior. So that's going to promote generalization. And again, just as a reminder, we're using conditioned reinforcers all the time. They're the bulk of the reinforcers that we're using. So this is just a little overview of what those things are, as well as some guidelines that will help us use them as effectively as possible.